Before I tell you how Elena Hartwell rebuilt her life from nothing, let me show you the moment she lost everything. Picture this, St. Louis, 1876. A young woman standing in the doorway of her home, watching two men tear apart the only security she'd ever known. Her husband, dead from fever just 3 weeks prior, had left behind not love letters or fond memories, but debts so massive they swallowed her entire world whole. What happened next would take her across 3 states, through 2 brutal years of survival, and finally to a dusty Kansas ranch where a man with storm-gray eyes would offer her something no one else had, not rescue, not charity, but genuine partnership. This is a story about trust earned through action. Love built on respect, and 2 wounded souls who discovered that the strongest foundations aren't built on perfect people, but on honest ones. If you believe in second chances and real partnership, stay until the end. And hit that like button so this story can find others who need to hear it. St. Louis, Missouri, September 1876. The knock on the door came at dawn, which Elena should have recognized as a warning. Nothing good ever arrived with the sunrise anymore. She'd been awake for hours anyway, sitting at the kitchen table with David's ledger open before her, trying to make sense of numbers that refused to add up no matter how many times she recalculated them. 3 weeks since the fever had taken him. 3 weeks of discovering that the man she'd married had built their life on promises as substantial as morning fog. Mrs. Hartwell. The voice through the door was polite but firm. "We need to speak with you." Elena knew what this was. She'd been expecting it, dreading it, lying awake at night imagining exactly this moment. She stood, smoothed her black morning dress, the only decent clothing she still owned, and opened the door. 2 men stood on her porch. Well-dressed. Serious faces. The kind of men who collected debts for a living and had stopped feeling sorry for widows a long time ago. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm afraid we're here on behalf of Mr. Coleman's creditors. Your late husband owed a substantial sum." $500, Elena interrupted quietly. "I found the paperwork yesterday." The taller man's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're aware of the debt, then?" "I'm aware of several debts." Elena's voice remained steady even as her hands trembled. "My husband was creative in his financial arrangements. Then you understand we'll need to secure payment. The house, take it." The words came out flat, emotionless. Elena had spent all her tears 2 nights ago when she'd finally understood the full scope of David's deceptions. "Take the furniture. Take everything. I have nothing left to give you." The men exchanged glances. The shorter one cleared his throat. "Mrs. Hartwell. We're not unreasonable people. If you need time to make arrangements, I don't need time. I need to not be here when you inventory my life." Elena picked up the small carpet bag she'd already packed, the one containing 2 dresses, some undergarments, and her mother's wooden spoon, the only items she'd managed to hide before the creditors could claim them. "The keys are on the kitchen table. Lock the door when you're finished." She walked past them without looking back, down the steps of the house where she'd lived for 5 years, where she believed in love and partnership and a future built on something real. That Elena died that morning in September. The woman who walked away was someone harder. Someone who understood that the only person you could truly depend on was yourself. Kansas Territory, July 1878. The wagon that carried Elena the last 30 miles from Dodge City rattled away behind her, leaving nothing but dust and the sound of her own breathing in the brutal afternoon heat. She stood at the edge of a rutted drive, one hand shading her eyes against the merciless sun, the other clutching the handle of that same worn carpet bag. 2 years. 2 years of taking any work she could find, washing clothes, scrubbing floors, cooking in boarding houses where the owner watched every cent and paid less. 2 years of saving every spare penny until she had enough for wagon passage and a chance at something better than survival. Reid Ranch spread before her like a testament to endurance barely maintained. The house was a low structure of weathered timber and stone, its porch sagging slightly. Beyond it, a barn leaned at an angle that suggested either poor construction or years of neglect. Fences ran in uneven lines across burned grass, and several outbuildings clustered together as if seeking shelter from a wind that never stopped. It looked tired, worn down. Barely holding on, Elena understood the feeling. The front door opened. A man stepped onto the porch, and even from a distance, Elena could feel the weight of his gaze. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in work clothes stained with dust and grease. His hat shadowed his face, but she could see the line of his jaw, the set of his mouth. He didn't move toward her, just stood there with one hand resting on the porch rail, watching. Elena forced her feet forward. The dirt drive crunched beneath her boots, good boots, the one thing she'd refused to sell, and the sun pressed down on her shoulders like it was trying to stop her progress. She kept her chin level, her expression calm. 2 years of hardship had taught her that showing fear only invited cruelty. When she reached the base of the porch steps, she stopped and met his eyes. They were gray, the color of storm clouds gathering on a flat horizon, and they studied her with careful assessment. "Afternoon," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I'm looking for Jackson Reid. You found him." His voice was low, rough-edged. "What do you need?" "Work." "I heard you need a cook." Something shifted in his expression, not quite surprise, but close. His gaze dropped to her carpet bag, then returned to her face. "You got references?" Elena reached into her dress pocket and pulled out the letter, its edges soft from handling. She climbed 2 steps and held it out. He took it, unfolded it with hands that were scarred and calloused, and read in silence. His jaw was set, his mouth a hard line. A few days' worth of stubble darkened his face, and there were lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from squinting into sun and wind. Or from carrying weight that had no business being carried alone. When he finished reading, he folded the letter again and handed it back. "This is from a hotel in St. Louis. 3 years old, yes. I worked there for 4 years before I married." Elena tucked the letter away. "The manager wrote that when I left, and since then," she could have lied. Could have invented some comfortable story about why a woman her age, 28, old enough to know better but young enough to still hope, would be standing alone at a stranger's ranch asking for work, but lies required energy she didn't have. "I married a man who made poor choices," she said quietly. "He died 2 years ago. I've been working where I could since then. Most recently at a boarding house in Dodge City. Mrs. Garrett will vouch for me if you send word." Jackson's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of recognition, maybe. Or understanding. What kind of poor choices? Elena met his gaze directly. The kind that left debts and no money to pay them. The kind that meant I had to sell everything we owned and start over with nothing. The kind that taught me not to depend on anyone but myself. The honesty hung between them, raw and unflinching. Jackson shifted his weight, his hand tightening briefly on the porch rail. Then he looked past her, out toward the barn and the land beyond. And something in his posture changed, softened just slightly. "I got 8 men working this ranch," he said, his voice still rough but less guarded. "They're good workers, but they're hungry all the time and tired of their own cooking. I can pay $30 a month, room and board included. You'll have the small cabin out back. It's got a stove, a bed, a table. You'll cook 3 meals a day, keep the kitchen clean, manage supplies. If you can handle that, the job's yours." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, relief so sharp it was almost painful. "I can handle it," Jackson nodded once. "Then welcome to Reid Ranch, Mrs." He paused, waiting. "Hartwell." "Elena Hartwell." "Mrs. Hartwell." He stepped back and gestured toward the door. "I'll show you the kitchen and the cabin. You can start tomorrow morning if that suits you." "It suits me fine." The house was dim inside, and cooler, though not by much. Elena's eyes adjusted slowly as she followed Jackson through a front room that served as both sitting area and office, a desk piled with papers, a few chairs, a cold fireplace. The floors were wood, scuffed and in need of scrubbing. The walls were bare except for a single photograph in a simple frame, a young woman with serious eyes and dark hair pulled back severely. Jackson didn't pause or explain. He led her through a doorway into the kitchen. It was larger than Elena had expected, with a good-sized iron stove, a long work table, open shelves stacked with mismatched dishes and supplies, and a dry sink beneath a window that looked out toward the barn. The room smelled like old coffee and something burned. Dirty dishes were piled near the sink, and the floor hadn't been swept in days. Elena set her carpet bag down and walked to the shelves, running her gaze over the supplies. Flour, cornmeal, beans, coffee, salt pork, a few tins of peaches. Basic, but workable. The men eat in the bunkhouse, Jackson said from behind her. I take my meals here or outside, depending. You'll need to ring the bell 30 minutes before breakfast and supper so they have time to wash up. There's a root cellar out back with potatoes, onions, carrots. Chickens in the coop for eggs. We butcher a steer every few months, so there's usually beef. Elena nodded, her mind already working through meal plans. Where do you get supplies? Town run every 2 weeks. I'll give you a list of what you need and bring it back. She turned to face him. I'd like to go with you next time. I'll know better what to buy if I can see the quality and prices myself. Jackson's brow lifted slightly, the first sign of surprise he'd shown. That's not usual. I'm good with numbers, Elena said evenly. And I know how to make a dollar stretch. If you want the men fed well on what you're spending. I need to see what I'm working with. For a moment, she thought he might refuse. But then he nodded, a slow, considering movement. Fair enough. Next runs in 4 days, thank you. He gestured toward the back door. I'll show you the cabin. The cabin sat about 50 yards behind the main house, a small square structure with a single room and a slanted roof. Inside, it was sparse but clean. Cleaner than the main house, actually. A narrow bed with a thin mattress and folded blankets, a small table with one chair, a pot-bellied stove in the corner, a shelf for personal belongings, a single window with faded curtains. Elena set her carpet bag on the bed and looked around. It was more than she'd had in months. More than she'd hoped for. It's good, she said quietly. Jackson stood in the doorway, his large frame blocking most of the light. There's a pump outside for water. Outhouse is 20 yards east. If you need anything else, let me know. Elena turned to face him. I will. Thank you, Mr. Reid, Jackson, he said, the word sounding almost reluctant. Everyone here just uses first names, Jackson, then. And I'm Elena, he nodded, then hesitated, his hand on the doorframe. For a moment, she thought he might say something else, something beyond the practicalities of work and wages. But whatever it was, he kept it to himself. I'll leave you to settle in, he said finally, and stepped back into the sunlight. Elena watched him walk away, his stride long and unhurried, his shoulders carrying the kind of tension that came from years of bearing too much alone. She understood that too. Elena woke before dawn the next morning, her body trained by years of kitchen work to rise when the sky was still dark. She dressed quickly in her work dress, plain brown cotton, sturdy and practical, and pinned her hair into a tight bun at the nape of her neck. The walk to the main house was cool, the air carrying the first hint of the brutal heat that would arrive with full sun. Elena let herself into the kitchen and lit a lamp. Then she got to work. First, she cleaned. Scrubbed the dishes, wiped down the shelves. Swept the floor, scoured the stove until the iron gleamed dully in the lamplight. Then she inventoried the supplies again, this time making notes on a scrap of paper she found in a drawer. By the time the sky began to lighten in the east, she had biscuits in the oven, salt pork frying in a skillet, and coffee boiling on the stove. She found a bell mounted on a post outside the back door and rang it hard, the sound cutting through the morning stillness. Within minutes, she heard boots on the porch, voices low and curious. The door opened, and the men filed in. There were 8 of them, just as Jackson had said, young and old, lean and weathered, all of them dusty and tired looking. They stopped just inside the doorway, staring at her with cautious surprise. Elena met their gazes calmly. "Good morning. I'm Elena Hartwell, the new cook. Breakfast is ready. You can sit at the table or take your plates outside, whichever you prefer." For a moment, no one moved. Then one of the older men, gray-haired with a face like tanned leather, stepped forward and removed his hat. "Morning, ma'am," he said, his voice gravelly but respectful. "Name's Ben Cordell. We're mighty glad to have you here." "Thank you, Ben. I hope you're hungry." That broke the tension. The men moved forward, murmuring greetings, grabbing plates and cups. Elena served them efficiently: biscuits, fried salt pork, strong coffee. She watched them eat, noting the way they attacked the food like men who'd been living on their own poor cooking for too long. "These biscuits are the best damn thing I've had in months," one of the younger men said through a mouthful, then flushed red. "Sorry, ma'am. Didn't mean to curse." "It's fine," Elena said, allowing herself a small smile. "I'm glad you like them." Jackson appeared in the doorway just as the men were finishing. He'd shaved since yesterday, and his hair was damp like he'd dunked his head in the water trough. His eyes went to Elena first, then to the cleaned kitchen, then to the men eating contentedly. "Morning," he said, "morning." "Boss," the men chorused. Jackson walked to the stove, poured himself coffee, and leaned against the counter. Elena handed him a plate without being asked: biscuits, salt pork, a fried egg she'd saved for him. He took it with a nod, his expression unreadable. The men finished eating, carried their dishes to the sink, and filed out with murmured thanks. When the last one had gone, the kitchen fell quiet except for the crackle of the stove. Jackson ate in silence, his gaze distant. When he finished, he set the plate on the counter and looked at her directly. "That was good," he said simply. The men noticed too. He gestured toward the clean kitchen. "This too," Elena shrugged slightly. "It needed doing." Jackson's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but close. "Most cooks wouldn't have bothered on their first morning." "I'm not most cooks." This time, his expression did shift into something that might have been amusement. "No. I don't imagine you are." He picked up his hat and settled it on his head. "I've got work. Ring the bell at noon for the midday meal and again at 6 for supper. If you need anything, Ben can help you. He's been here longest and knows where everything is." "I'll manage." Jackson paused at the door and looked back at her. His eyes were still that stormy gray, but there was something different in them now. Something that might have been respect. Or at least the beginning of it. "I believe you will," he said, and then he was gone. Elena fell into the rhythm of ranch life quickly. She woke before dawn, prepared breakfast, cleaned the kitchen, then spent mornings baking bread or preparing the midday meal. Afternoons were for laundry, mending, and planning supper. Evenings, after the men had eaten and gone, she sat alone in her cabin and wrote lists, things that needed fixing, supplies to request, ways to stretch the food budget further. The work was hard, but it was honest. And the men, rough as they were, treated her with cautious respect. Ben Cordell became her unexpected ally. He showed her where the root cellar was, how to work the finicky pump, which chickens were the best layers. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words were practical and kind. "You're doing good here, ma'am," he said one afternoon as he helped her carry a basket of potatoes. "The men are happier. They work better when they're fed proper." "I'm glad," Elena said. Ben glanced toward the main house where Jackson was visible through the window, bent over paperwork. "Boss is different too. Lighter somehow. Don't think he's smiled in 2 years, but I saw something close to it this morning when he was drinking your coffee." Elena followed his gaze. Through the window, she could see Jackson's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the concentration in his posture. He looked tired, she thought. Bone-deep tired. "He carries a lot," she said quietly, "more than he should." Ben agreed. Lost his wife 2 years back. Childbirth. Baby didn't make it either. He's been running this place alone ever since, trying to keep it from falling apart. Some days I think he's holding on out of pure stubbornness. Elena's chest tightened. She knew what that kind of loss did to a person. How it carved out hollow places that nothing could fill. He's strong, she said. Strong, yes, Ben said. But strength only gets you so far when you're carrying weight meant for two. That night, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Jackson, about the photograph of the serious-eyed woman in the front room. About the way he carried himself like every step required conscious effort, about the loneliness that seemed to radiate from him like heat from sun-baked stone. She rose and walked to her cabin door, opening it to let in the cool night air. The ranch was quiet, peaceful. Stars blazed overhead in a sky unobscured by city lights. For a moment, Elena felt something she hadn't allowed herself in 2 years, a sense of belonging, not safety, exactly. Not security. But something like possibility. As the days passed, Elena began to notice things. The supply inventory was chaotic, with no clear record of what had been purchased or when. She found duplicate orders, wasted food, supplies stored improperly and spoiling. The men had no set schedule for meals, which meant they ate whenever they got hungry and wasted time wandering back and forth to the kitchen. And the financial records, what little she saw when Jackson left papers on the kitchen table, were a mess. Expenses recorded without dates, income listed without corresponding sales receipts, debts noted but not tracked. It made her fingers itch to fix it. One evening, after supper had been served and the men had gone, Elena knocked on the door of Jackson's office. "Come in," he called. She found him at his desk, surrounded by papers, his expression dark with frustration. He looked up when she entered, and some of the tension left his face. "Elena. Something wrong?" "No, but I'd like to talk to you about something if you have a moment." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. "Sit." Elena sat, folding her hands in her lap. She'd thought carefully about how to approach this, knowing that men didn't always take kindly to women pointing out their failures, even when those failures were obvious. "I've been here a week now," she began, "and I've been managing the kitchen and the food supplies. I've noticed some inefficiencies." Jackson's brow furrowed. "What kind of inefficiencies?" Elena took a breath. "The inventory system is disorganized. You're ordering supplies without checking what you already have. Which means you're paying for things twice and letting other things spoil. The men's meal schedule is irregular, which wastes their time and yours. And the chickens aren't being fed properly. If we adjusted their feed, we could double the egg production and cut your costs." She paused, watching his face for signs of anger or defensiveness. But Jackson just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, expression thoughtful. "Go on, I could fix it," Elena said carefully. "The inventory, I mean. I could set up a proper tracking system, manage the ordering, organize the storage. It wouldn't take much time, and it would save you money." "A lot of money, probably." Jackson was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her. Then he leaned forward, resting his forearms on the desk. "You're not just a cook, are you?" "I'm a good cook," Elena said. "But I'm also good with numbers and organization. I managed the hotel in St. Louis before I married. Not just the kitchen, but the supplies, the budget, the staff schedules. I know how to run things efficiently." "Why didn't you mention that when you applied for the job?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "Because I needed the job, and I didn't think you'd hire a woman to do anything more than cook." "Men usually don't." Jackson's mouth twitched, that almost smile again. "Fair point." He tapped his fingers on the desk, thinking. "All right. You can reorganize the kitchen supplies and the inventory system. If it works, if I see real savings, we'll talk about expanding your responsibilities." Relief washed through Elena. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Jackson said, but his tone was lighter. If you're wrong and this doesn't save money, I'll have wasted time I don't have. I'm not wrong, Elena said quietly. Jackson looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his expression. Then he nodded. I believe you. Elena threw herself into the work with focused intensity. She spent every spare moment reorganizing the kitchen, setting up inventory sheets, tracking supplies, documenting waste. She rearranged the storage to keep like items together. Labeled everything, and created a running tally of what needed to be ordered and when. Within 2 weeks, the difference was obvious. The kitchen ran more smoothly. Waste dropped. The men ate better meals on less money. Even Jackson noticed. Ben says you've been working miracles, he said one evening as Elena cleaned up after supper. She glanced up from the dishes. Not miracles. Just common sense. Common sense isn't that common. Jackson hesitated, then added, I looked over the numbers you've been keeping. You're right. We're saving money. More than I expected. Elena allowed herself a small smile. I told you I was good with numbers, you did. Jackson leaned against the doorframe. Arms crossed, watching her work. How would you feel about looking at the ranch's financial records? I'll be honest, they're a mess. I'm good at running cattle and managing land, but bookkeeping isn't my strength. If you think you can make sense of them, I'd be grateful. Elena's heart beat faster. This was more than she'd hoped for. A real chance to prove herself indispensable, to secure her place here beyond just cooking meals. I'd be happy to. Good. Jackson pushed off from the doorframe. I'll bring the ledgers to the kitchen tomorrow morning. Fair warning, they're worse than the inventory records. I'll manage, Elena said. Jackson's mouth curved into something that was almost. Finally, a real smile. Yeah. I'm starting to think you can manage just about anything. The ledgers were, as Jackson had warned, a disaster. Elena spread them across the kitchen table the next morning and stared at pages of cramped handwriting, crossed out numbers, missing dates, and unexplained expenses. It would take days, maybe weeks, to untangle, but she'd done harder things. She'd survived worse. She made fresh coffee, rolled up her sleeves, and got to work. Hours passed. The sun climbed higher, then began its descent. Elena barely noticed. She cross-referenced receipts, reconstructed timelines, tracked patterns of income and expense. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The ranch wasn't failing exactly. But it was struggling. Income from cattle sales was steady but not growing. Expenses were creeping upward, supplies, equipment, repairs, wages. There were debts too. Not crushing, but significant. Owed to the bank, to suppliers, to neighboring ranchers who'd loaned Jackson money when times got tight. It was survivable. But only if things changed. Elena was still working when Jackson came in for supper. He stopped short when he saw the table covered in papers. Elena bent over the ledgers with ink-stained fingers and fierce concentration. You've been at this all day, he said, his voice edged with concern. I'm almost finished, Elena said without looking up. Jackson crossed to the table and looked down at the pages she'd filled with neat columns and careful calculations. His expression shifted, surprise, then something deeper. Respect, maybe. Gratitude, Elena, he said quietly. You don't have to. Yes, I do, she interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. You hired me. You gave me a chance when you didn't have to. The least I can do is help you keep this place running. Jackson was silent for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Tell me what you found. So she did. She walked him through the numbers, showing him where money was being wasted, where income could be increased, where debts could be consolidated and paid down faster. She pointed out patterns he'd missed, inefficiencies he hadn't noticed, opportunities he hadn't considered. Jackson listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious as she talked. When she finished, he sat back and ran a hand over his face. I knew things were tight. But I didn't realize it was this bad. it's not hopeless, Elena said quickly. The ranch is sound. The land is good. You just need better organization and a plan to reduce waste. If we implement the changes I'm suggesting, you could be profitable within a year. Jackson repeated, his gray eyes intent on her face. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I meant you. It's your ranch, but you're the one fixing it. Jackson said. His voice was low, rough with an emotion she couldn't quite name. I don't know how to thank you for this. You don't have to thank me, Elena said. Just let me keep doing it. Jackson held her gaze for a long moment, something shifting in the air between them, something fragile and tentative and dangerous. Then he stood, breaking the moment. I'll let you finish. And Elena, yes, you're not just the cook anymore. You're part of this ranch now. Partner, if you're willing, partner. Not employee. Not servant. Partner, Elena's breath caught. I'm willing, Jackson nodded once, then left the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. Elena sat alone in the lamplight. Surrounded by papers and numbers and the ghost of a future she was starting, against all odds, to believe in. The next morning, Ben Cordell found Elena in the supply shed, organizing tools with the same systematic efficiency she'd brought to everything else. Ma'am, you got a minute? Elena looked up from the box of hardware she'd been sorting. Of course, Ben. What do you need? The older man shifted his weight, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable. It ain't about ranch business. I wanted to say something, if you'll hear me out. I'm listening. Ben was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. I had a wife once. Mary. She was strong like you. Smart. Could run a household better than most men could run a business. He paused, his weathered face softening with memory. But the world didn't much care about that. When I fell on hard times, lost our farm in the panic of '73, folks said it was her fault for not being a proper wife. Said she'd gotten above her station, thinking she could manage money like a man. Elena set down the tools, giving him her full attention. She divorced me, Ben continued. Not because she didn't love me, but because staying married meant starving together when we could both survive apart. It was the practical thing to do. But society, well, they didn't see it that way. Called her all kinds of names. Made her life hell. His voice cracked slightly. She died 3 years later. Pneumonia. But I think it was really the weight of all that judgment that killed her. Ben, I'm so sorry. I'm not telling you this for sympathy, ma'am. I'm telling you because. He met her eyes. Because you remind me of her. And I see the way the boss looks at you. And I see the way you look at him when you think no one's watching. And I want you to know, whatever you're afraid of, whatever made you so careful about trusting people, you don't have to be afraid here. He's a good man. And you deserve a good man. Elena felt tears prick her eyes. I don't know if I'm ready for that, ready or not. Life keeps moving, Ben said gently. My Mary used to say that fear is just proof you've got something worth losing. The alternative is living so safe and small that nothing ever touches you. That's not living, ma'am. That's just waiting to die. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Elena alone with his words echoing in the quiet shed. That evening, Elena couldn't stop thinking about what Ben had said. She went through the motions of preparing supper, serving the men, cleaning up afterward. But her mind was elsewhere, circling around the question of what she wanted, what she was willing to risk for it. When there was a knock on her cabin door after dark, she knew who it would be before she opened it. Jackson stood on her doorstep, hat in hand, looking uncertain in a way that made her heart squeeze. I know it's late, he said. But I was hoping we could talk. Elena stepped aside. Come in. He entered the small cabin, seeming to fill the space with his presence. Elena lit a second lamp and gestured to the chair while she perched on the edge of her bed. I've been thinking, Jackson began, then stopped, started again. About what I said yesterday. About partnership. And I want to make sure you understand what I meant by that. All right, this ranch. It's been my whole life since Abigail died. It's the only thing that kept me going when I wanted to give up. But running it alone. He shook his head. I'm tired, Elena. Bone tired. And what you've done in just a few weeks, the way you've pulled this place back from the edge, it's more than I could have managed in a year. You would have figured it out eventually, maybe. But that's not the point. Jackson leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze intense. The point is that you're not just good at what you do. You're exceptional. And you deserve to be recognized for that. To be valued for it. Not as a cook, not as help, but as a true partner in running this operation. Elena's throat tightened. Jackson, I'm not asking for anything beyond that, he interrupted. I'm not trying to. I just want you to know that I see you. I see what you're capable of. And I'm grateful you chose to be here. The silence that followed felt enormous. Elena could hear her own heartbeat, loud in her ears. Can I tell you something? She said finally. Anything. My husband, David, he was charming. Full of dreams and plans. He made everything sound possible, exciting. And I believed him because I wanted to believe that someone could see value in me beyond what I could cook or clean or provide. Her voice wavered but held steady. But he didn't value me. Not really. He saw me as a convenient solution to his problems, someone to manage his household while he chased schemes that went nowhere. And when he died and the debts came due, I realized I'd been invisible the whole time. A tool. Not a person. I'm not David, Jackson said quietly. I know that. I do. But knowing it and trusting it are different things. Jackson nodded slowly. Then I'll prove it. However long it takes. I'll prove that when I say partner, I mean it in every sense that matters. Elena looked at this man who'd given her work when she was desperate, who trusted her judgment without question, who looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For being patient. For being honest. For. She couldn't finish. Jackson stood and moved toward the door, but he paused with his hand on the frame. Elena? One more thing. Yes, when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like the chance to be more than just your business partner. But there's no pressure. No expectations. Just possibility. If you want it. He left before she could respond, closing the door gently behind him. Elena sat in the lamplight for a long time, her mind racing, her heart full of feelings she'd spent 2 years trying to avoid. Possibility, he'd said. Maybe that was enough to start with. The supply run to Dodge City came 4 days later, just as Jackson had promised. Elena woke before dawn to find him already saddling horses, his big bay gelding and a smaller sorrel mare with gentle eyes. She's got an easy gait, Jackson said, handing Elena the reins. Won't tire you out. Elena swung into the saddle with competence born of childhood riding lessons that felt like another lifetime ago. The mare shifted beneath her, testing, then settled when Elena's hands remained steady. She'll do, Elena said. Jackson's mouth quirked. High praise. They left at first light, riding ahead of the sunrise. The prairie stretched before them in rolling waves of grass gone gold with late summer, broken only by occasional stands of cottonwood along creek beds and the distant purple smudge of hills on the horizon. The sky arched overhead, vast and blue, and the wind carried the smell of dust and dry grass. They rode in comfortable silence for the first hour. Then Jackson asked, "You grew up riding?" "My father kept horses before he lost everything in the Panic of '73. I was 14. We had a farm outside St. Louis. Nothing grand, but comfortable. Then the banks failed and suddenly we had nothing. Father never recovered from it. He died the next year." "I'm sorry," Elena shrugged. "Mother and I moved to the city. That's when I started working at the hotel. The manager, Mrs. Hartwell, same last name as me after I married, she took me under her wing. Taught me everything about managing money, people, supplies. She told me once that the world would try to convince me I was worth less because I was female. And that I should never believe it. Smart woman, very. She said my value wasn't determined by what men thought of me, but by what I could accomplish on my own merit. Jackson glanced at her. Sounds like someone you should listen to. I try. Though it's not always easy when the world keeps proving her wrong. The world's wrong about a lot of things, Jackson said quietly. Doesn't mean we have to accept its judgments. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat the lunch Elena had packed, cold chicken, biscuits, apples from the root cellar. They sat in the shade of a lone cottonwood, and Jackson asked about her plans for the ranch's winter operations. I want to diversify income. Elena said. Right now you're completely dependent on cattle sales. But what if we started raising chickens for eggs to sell in town? And I've been researching butter production. With a good milk cow and the right equipment, we could produce enough to sell and still have plenty for the ranch. Jackson listened intently, asking questions, raising practical concerns, building on her suggestions with his own knowledge of land and market. It was the kind of conversation Elena had dreamed of having with David but never had, two minds working together toward a common goal, each valuing what the other brought. We'll need startup money, Jackson said finally. For the equipment and the additional livestock. I've been setting aside a portion of my wages, Elena admitted. Just small amounts. It's not much yet, but by spring we should have enough to start small. Jackson's brow furrowed. You've been saving your wages for the ranch? Elena suddenly felt uncertain. Was that wrong? I should have asked first. No. Jackson's hand covered hers, warm and steady. It's not wrong. I'm just, Elena, that money is yours. You earned it, and I'm choosing to invest it in something I believe in, Elena said. In this ranch. In our partnership. Unless you don't want, I want, Jackson interrupted firmly. God, Elena, of course I want you invested in this. I'm just making sure you understand that you're choosing this. That I'm not assuming or expecting, you're not. This is my choice. All of it. Jackson's fingers tightened on hers. Then thank you for believing this place is worth investing in. That I'm worth investing in, you are, Elena said simply. We both are. They reached Dodge City on the afternoon of the second day, riding into town as the sun hung low in the western sky. The town had grown since Elena's last visit, with new buildings going up and more people crowding the wooden sidewalks. Piano music drifted from a saloon, mixing with the shouts of freighters and the constant movement of horses and people. Jackson secured rooms at a modest hotel near the stockyards, separate accommodations. Despite the extra cost, propriety matters, he said quietly as they stood in the lobby. I won't have anyone thinking less of you. Elena wanted to argue that she didn't care what strangers thought, but she recognized the gesture for what it was, respect. Protection not of her physical safety, but of her reputation in a world that judged women harshly. Thank you. Her room was small but clean, with a real bed and a washstand and curtains on the window. Elena unpacked her single change of clothes, freshened up, and met Jackson downstairs for supper. Over beef and potatoes, Jackson outlined the plan. I've arranged meetings with 3 potential buyers tomorrow. We'll hear their offers, review the terms, and make a decision together. Whatever we choose, it'll be because we both agreed it's the best deal. You trust my judgment that much? I trust your judgment more than my own when it comes to numbers and contracts, Jackson said. You see things I miss. Ask questions I don't think to ask. That's valuable, Elena. More valuable than you know. The next morning, they met with the first buyer, a portly man named Henderson who ran one of the larger stockyards. He offered a fair price but wanted to defer payment for 30 days. Elena flagged it immediately. We need cash in hand, she said firmly when they'd stepped away to discuss. Deferred payment gives him time to claim defects or renegotiate. You've got bills to pay and winter supplies to purchase. We can't afford to wait. The second buyer offered cash but at a price 15% below market value. Elena did the calculations in her head while the man was still talking and shook her head slightly at Jackson. We'll consider your offer and get back to you, Jackson said smoothly. The third buyer was a woman, which surprised both of them. Catherine Brennan ran a meat processing operation that supplied restaurants and hotels throughout Kansas and into Colorado. She was perhaps 50, with sharp eyes and an air of competence that Elena recognized and respected immediately. Mr. Reid, Catherine said, shaking Jackson's hand firmly. I've heard good things about your cattle. Clean stock, well-managed herd, thank you, ma'am. This is my business partner, Elena Hartwell. Catherine's eyebrows rose slightly, but she shook Elena's hand with the same firm grip. Business partner? That's refreshing. Most ranchers leave their wives at home. Mrs. Hartwell manages our finances and operations, Jackson said. I wouldn't make a decision this important without her input, smart man. Catherine gestured to chairs in her office. Let's talk numbers. Her offer was fair, market rate, cash payment, immediate transfer. But there was something else. A proposal that made Elena's pulse quicken. I'm always looking for reliable suppliers, Catherine said. If your cattle are as good as I've heard, I'd be interested in a standing agreement. Regular purchases at guaranteed prices, with advance notice so you can plan your operations accordingly. Elena felt her heart race. How regular? Quarterly to start. If the quality holds, we could move to monthly purchases within a year. Elena glanced at Jackson and saw her own excitement reflected in his eyes. This wasn't just a single sale. This was stability. Predictable income. The ability to plan and invest instead of gambling on uncertain markets. We'd need the terms in writing, Elena said. Including quality standards, pricing formulas based on market rates, delivery schedules, and payment timelines. Catherine's smile was approving. Of course. I'll have my lawyer draw up a contract. We can review it together before you leave town. They spent the next 2 hours working through details, with Elena asking pointed questions about every clause and Catherine answering with the same straightforward competence. By the time they finished, Elena felt cautiously optimistic. She's legitimate, Elena said when they were alone, walking back to the hotel. I've seen operations like hers. She's built something real, and she needs reliable suppliers to maintain it. You trust her, Elena considered. I trust that our interests align. She needs quality cattle on a regular basis. We need stable income. As long as we deliver what we promise, this could be exactly what the ranch needs. Jackson stopped walking and turned to face her. Around them, people flowed past in both directions, but Elena only saw him. Then we accept her offer, Jackson said. Pending review of the contract. Pending review, Elena agreed. They sealed the agreement the next day after Elena had spent hours reviewing the contract language with attention to detail that impressed even Catherine's lawyer. The cattle would be delivered within the week. Payment would be made in cash. The standing agreement would begin the following quarter. Walking out of Catherine's office with a signed contract felt like victory. Elena wanted to laugh, to spin in the street, to shout that they'd done it. Instead, she maintained her composure until they were back at the hotel. Then she let herself smile at Jackson with genuine, unguarded joy. We did it, you did it, Jackson corrected. I would have taken the first offer if you hadn't been there. We did it together, Elena insisted. That's what partnership means. Jackson's expression softened. They were standing in the hotel hallway outside their respective rooms, and the corridor was empty, granting them privacy for once. Elena Hartwell, Jackson said quietly, you are the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Before Elena could respond, before she could deflect or downplay or retreat into safety, Jackson leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle, careful, a question more than a demand. His lips warm against hers, his hand cupping her face with surprising tenderness. Elena froze for a heartbeat, surprise warring with desire. Then she leaned in and kissed him back. The world narrowed to the press of his mouth on hers, the solid warmth of his body, the gentle touch of his hand on her cheek. It was nothing like kissing David, no performance, no charm deployed like a weapon. This was honest and real and full of barely restrained want. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "I know," Elena said. "I wanted you to." His laugh was quiet, breathless. "You could have said something. So could you." "I did. In your cabin, remember, that was very abstract and philosophical," Elena said. "This is much clearer." Jackson's thumb traced her cheekbone. "I can be clearer still, if you want," Elena's heart hammered. She knew they were standing at another crossroads. She could step back, retreat to safety, or she could step forward into uncertainty and hope. "I want," she started, then stopped as footsteps sounded on the stairs. They stepped apart as an elderly couple appeared, nodding politely as they passed. The moment broke, and Elena felt reality crash back in, the hotel hallway, the impropriety of being caught embracing, but Jackson's hand found hers and squeezed gently. "We should probably get supper." "Probably," Elena agreed, "but Elena?" Jackson waited until she met his eyes. "This conversation isn't over." "Good," Elena said. "Neither am I." They had supper in the hotel dining room, sitting across from each other and talking about ranch business and market prices and the logistics of quarterly cattle deliveries. To any observer, they would have looked like business associates, but under the table, Jackson's foot rested against Elena's, a constant warm pressure. And when their hands brushed reaching for the salt, the touch lingered. Elena went to bed that night in her small hotel room and lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her lips still tingling. She thought about the future they were building, the ranch running efficiently, the steady income from Catherine's standing order, the partnership they'd forged through hard work and mutual respect, and she thought about Jackson. About the way he looked at her like she was both mystery and revelation. About the gentle strength in his hands. About the fact that he'd waited for her to be ready instead of pushing. This could work. Elena thought. This could actually work. The fear was still there, would probably always be there. But it was smaller now, crowded out by something stronger and brighter, hope. She was allowing herself to hope. They rode out of Dodge City at dawn, the contract safely tucked in Jackson's saddlebag. The morning air carried the first real bite of autumn, and Elena pulled her shawl tighter as they navigated through quiet streets toward open prairie. Neither of them mentioned the kiss from the night before, but it sat between them, changing the quality of their silence from comfortable to charged. They were perhaps an hour outside town when Jackson finally spoke, about last night. "We should probably talk about it," Elena said at the same time. They both stopped. Jackson's mouth quirked. "You first," Elena gathered her thoughts. "I'm not sorry it happened." "Good. Neither am I, but I also don't know what it means. What happens when we get back? Do things change, or do we just—" She gestured helplessly. "Keep building what we've been building," Jackson finished. "Just with honesty about what we're feeling instead of dancing around it. Is that what you want?" Jackson reined his horse to a stop, and Elena did the same. They sat facing each other in the middle of empty prairie, with grass stretching to the horizon and the sky arching overhead in endless blue. "What I want," Jackson said carefully, "is to court you properly. To take time and do this right. To prove that I'm serious about you, about us, and that this isn't just convenience or loneliness." Elena's throat tightened. "That's a lot of words for a man who usually keeps them sparse. You're worth a lot of words. Worth doing things properly, I am sure," Elena heard herself say, and was startled to realize it was true. "About you, I mean. About this. I've been sure for a while. I just couldn't let myself believe it." Jackson's eyes searched her face. "And now I'm choosing to believe it," Elena said. "To trust what I see instead of what I'm afraid of." You've shown me who you are, Jackson. Every single day. I'd be a fool not to trust that, so we're doing this, Jackson said, wonder in his voice. Actually doing this, appears so, Elena said, and found herself smiling despite the butterflies in her stomach. Jackson urged his horse closer until they were side by side, then reached over and took Elena's hand. His palm was warm and calloused against hers, solid and real. Then let me say it plain. I'm courting you, Elena Hartwell, with the intention of marriage if you'll have me. I know it's too soon to ask that now, but I want you to know where I'm heading, so you can decide if you want to head there too, marriage. The word should have terrified her. Instead, Elena felt something settle in her chest, something that felt almost like peace. I'll need time, she said honestly. To be absolutely certain, take all the time you need, Jackson interrupted gently. I'm not going anywhere. And neither, I hope, are you. I'm not. I'm right where I want to be. They rode on, hands linked until the terrain forced them to separate. And Elena felt lighter than she had in years. But that evening, as they made camp under stars that blazed in the darkness, Jackson grew quiet. Elena watched him stare into the fire, his expression distant and troubled. What is it? She asked finally. Jackson was silent for a long moment. Then he said, There's something I need to tell you. About Abigail. Elena set down the cup of coffee she'd been holding. All right, I told you she died in childbirth. And that's true, technically. But it's not the whole truth. Jackson's voice was rough, strained. She didn't die from complications. She died because she chose to. Elena's breath caught. After the baby was born, a little girl, perfect and healthy, Abigail started crying. And she wouldn't stop. The midwife said it was normal, that new mothers get emotional. But it wasn't normal crying. It was. He stopped, swallowed hard. It was like something broke inside her. She wouldn't hold the baby. Wouldn't look at her. Just cried and stared at the wall. Jackson, the baby died 3 days later. Failure to thrive, the doctor said. Because Abigail wouldn't nurse her, wouldn't care for her. And 2 days after that, I woke up and Abigail was gone. I found her in the barn. His voice cracked. She'd hanged herself. Elena moved around the fire and sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. I couldn't save her, Jackson whispered. I didn't even know she was that far gone. I thought she was just tired, just adjusting. I didn't see the signs. And by the time I realized something was really wrong, it was too late. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? Jackson's eyes were bright with unshed tears. I was her husband. I should have protected her. Should have seen what was happening. You can't protect someone from what's happening inside their own mind, Elena said quietly. I've seen that kind of despair, Jackson. After David died and the creditors came. There were nights when I thought about just giving up. Walking into the Missouri River and letting it take me. The only thing that stopped me was stubbornness. Pure, stupid stubbornness. Jackson looked at her, really looked at her. You couldn't have saved Abigail, Elena continued. Because she couldn't save herself. And I know, God, I know, how much that hurts. But you're not responsible for her pain. You're only responsible for how you live now. For whether you let that tragedy define you or whether you choose to keep building a life worth living. Jackson was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I'm scared of loving you, I know, because if something happens, if I lose you too, you won't lose me, Elena interrupted. Not the way you lost Abigail. I'm not fragile, Jackson. I'm not going to break under pressure. I've already been broken and I rebuilt myself from pieces. I know how strong I am now. You're the strongest person I've ever known, Jackson said. But that doesn't make me less afraid. Elena took his hand. Then be afraid with me. Because I'm terrified too. Terrified of trusting you completely and discovering I was wrong. Terrified of building something real and watching it collapse. But I'm choosing to do it anyway. Because you're worth the risk." Jackson pulled her close, his arms coming around her, his face buried in her hair. Elena held him while he shook with silent tears, releasing grief he'd carried alone for 2 years. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were red but clearer. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For listening. For not running. For being exactly who you are." Elena kissed him then, gentle and sure, tasting salt on his lips. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "We're going to be all right," she whispered. "Both of us, together," Jackson said. Together, they arrived back at Reid Ranch 5 days after leaving, meeting Ben and the crew at the arranged rendezvous point. The men were tired but in good spirits, and their faces lit up when Jackson shared news of the sale. "Catherine Brennan's taking the whole herd," Jackson announced. "Market rate, cash on delivery. And she wants a standing purchase agreement, quarterly sales to start, possibly monthly within a year." A cheer went up from the men. Ben's weathered face split into a grin. "That's fine news, boss. Real fine news." "Mrs. Hartwell negotiated the contract," Jackson said, and Elena felt every eye turn to her. "Without her, we'd have taken a worse deal with no guarantee of future sales." 3 cheers for Mrs. Hartwell. Will Carter shouted, and the men obliged with enthusiasm that made Elena's cheeks burn. "I just did the numbers," she protested. "You did a hell of a lot more than numbers," Ben said. "You gave this ranch a future. That's worth celebrating." They delivered the cattle to Catherine's stockyard 2 days later. Elena watched with satisfaction as the count was verified and payment made in full. Catherine inspected the herd personally, nodding with approval. "Your cattle are everything I'd hoped for," she told Jackson. "I'll have the paperwork ready for the first quarterly delivery by end of next month. Looking forward to a long and profitable partnership." "As are we," Jackson said, and his hand found Elena's, squeezing gently. Catherine's sharp eyes caught the gesture. Her mouth curved knowingly. "Partnership in business and otherwise, it seems. Good for you both." The ride back to the ranch took 5 days. There was something magical about these days on the trail, just Elena and Jackson and the crew, working together, building something real. No walls between them, no roles to play, but reality waited at the ranch. They arrived on a cool October evening with the first frost silvering the grass. The ranch looked different to Elena somehow, though nothing had physically changed. It felt like home now. Not just a place she worked, but a place she belonged. The men dispersed to their quarters. Elena headed toward her cabin, suddenly unsure of the new dynamic. A knock came at her door minutes later. Jackson stood on her doorstep, hat in hand, looking uncertain. "I know it's late, but I was hoping we could talk about what happens now that we're back." Elena stepped aside. "Come in." He entered, seeming to fill the small space. "I've been thinking about propriety. About what people will say. About how we navigate this courting business while you're living here. Technically, I'm your business partner now," Elena pointed out. "Not just an employee, true. But people might not see it that way. Might assume things." He twisted his hat in his hands. "I don't want to cause you trouble, Elena. Your reputation matters." Elena considered this. "I appreciate your concern. But I think we're past the point where propriety is our main consideration. We live on the same ranch. We work together daily. What matters more to me than what narrow-minded people might whisper is that we're honest about our intentions. You're sure, I'm sure. But I do think we should be clear with the men. They respect you, Jackson. They'll follow your lead. If you make it known you're courting me honorably, with intention of marriage, they'll accept it." Jackson's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. "You're remarkable, you've mentioned it." Elena smiled. "But I don't mind hearing it again." He crossed to where she sat and knelt so they were eye level. His hands covered hers. Then let me be clear. I'm courting you, Elena Hartwell. Openly and honorably. I intend to marry you if you'll have me, though I know we need time before that question gets asked properly. And anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. That's quite a declaration. You deserve declarations. You deserve everything, Elena. And I aim to prove I can give it to you. Elena leaned forward and kissed him, tasting the promise on his lips. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. We're really doing this, she whispered. We really are, Jackson agreed. The next morning, Jackson gathered the crew after breakfast. I want you all to know that I'm courting Mrs. Hartwell, he said with characteristic directness. My intentions are honorable and serious. She's my partner in running this ranch, and if she agrees, she'll be my wife before too long. Any man who has a problem with that can collect his wages and move on. The silence felt endless. Elena stood beside Jackson, chin high, ready for whatever came. Then Ben stepped forward. About damn time, boss. Been wondering when you'd figure out what the rest of us already knew. Laughter rippled through the crew. Will grinned. Does this mean Mrs. Hartwell will keep cooking for us? Because if she leaves the kitchen, we're all in trouble. I'm not going anywhere, Elena said. Someone has to make sure you're all fed properly. The men returned to work with easy acceptance. And Elena felt the last knot of worry dissolve. The weeks that followed settled into a new rhythm. Elena and Jackson still worked together daily, but now there was no need to hide touches that lingered, smiles that held private meaning, evenings spent on the porch talking long after sunset. Jackson courted her with careful attention. He brought her wildflowers from the range. He asked her opinion on every decision. He sat with her in evenings and talked about dreams for the future. And Elena, for her part, let herself be courted. Let herself trust that this man meant what he said. But the past, Elena had learned, never stayed buried forever. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late October, carried by the mail rider who made monthly rounds. Elena was in the kitchen preparing bread when Jackson brought it in, his expression troubled. This came for you. She wiped flour from her hands and took the envelope. The return address was from Dodge City, from a law office she didn't recognize. Her stomach knotted with dread. Should I stay? Jackson asked quietly. Please. Elena opened the envelope with hands that wanted to shake. Inside was a single sheet of official-looking paper and a photograph. As she read, the words seemed to blur and refocus. Each one landing like a stone in her chest. The letter was from a lawyer representing a man named Marcus Hale. It stated that David Hartwell had owed Marcus a significant sum, $300, at the time of his death. That this debt had not been satisfied. That as David's widow, Elena was legally responsible, but it was the photograph that made Elena's blood run cold. It showed David standing with a woman Elena had never seen before. And a child, maybe 5 or 6 years old, with David's eyes and David's smile. On the back, someone had written, Omaha, 1875. David, Rebecca, and little Thomas. Marcus Hale's letter continued. Your husband had another family in Omaha. The child needs support. Pay $300 or I expose this to your new fiancé and the entire territory. You have 2 weeks. Elena's hands shook so badly the paper rattled. Jackson took it from her gently and read, his face darkening. This is extortion, he said flatly, but Elena barely heard him. She was staring at the photograph, at the little boy who looked so much like David, at the woman whose face held the same hope Elena must have worn once. He had another family, she whispered. The whole time we were married. He had another family and I never knew. Elena, was any of it real? Her voice cracked. Did he ever love me, or was I just convenient? Just another scheme. Jackson set the letter down and took both her hands. This doesn't change who you are. It doesn't change what we're building, but Elena felt the familiar cold dread spreading through her chest. It changes everything. Don't you see? I brought poison into something good. My past, my mistakes, they're going to destroy this. No, I need to think. Elena pulled away. I need to. I can't do this right now. She fled to her cabin despite Jackson calling her name, shut the door, and sank onto her bed. The photograph stared up at her from where she dropped it. David's face. Smiling. Happy. With a family she hadn't known existed. How many other secrets had he kept? How many other lies? And how could she ever trust her own judgment again? For 2 days, Elena avoided Jackson beyond what was necessary for ranch operations. She cooked, she cleaned, she managed the household with mechanical efficiency while her mind spun in circles. She could pay the debt, pool her savings with Jackson's resources. But $300 was a fortune, money they'd earmarked for expanding the ranch. She could ignore it. But Marcus Hale's letter had been clear about consequences, or she could run. Take what money she had and disappear before her past destroyed what Jackson was building. The thought rose unbidden and shameful. But Elena couldn't shake it. She'd spent 2 years running from David's mistakes. What was one more departure? On the 3rd day, Ben found her in the supply shed, ostensibly checking inventory but really just hiding. Mrs. Hartwell, you got a minute? Elena looked up from her ledger. Of course. Ben closed the door behind him. I'm going to speak plain, if you'll forgive an old man's boldness. All right, you're planning to run. Elena's breath caught. I don't. I seen that look before, Ben interrupted gently. On my Mary's face the day she left. That look that says you're already gone, you just haven't told your body yet. Ben, let me finish. He held up a hand. When Mary left me, I was hurt. Angry. Felt like she'd given up on us. But years later, after she died, I understood. She was trying to protect me. Thought if she carried the shame alone, maybe I could survive it. His voice roughened. But see, that's the thing about love, ma'am. Real love. It ain't about one person carrying all the weight. It's about 2 people choosing to carry it together. What if my weight is too much? Elena whispered, what if it ain't? Ben countered. What if you running hurts him worse than staying ever could? What if you denying him the chance to stand with you is the real betrayal? Elena felt tears spill over. I'm scared, I know. But running from fear don't make it go away. Just means you carry it alone. Ben moved toward the door. Then paused. Boss is out at the north pasture. If you're gonna make a choice, make it facing him. Don't let him wake up one morning and find you gone. Elena found Jackson exactly where Ben said he'd be, standing at a fence line, looking out over grazing cattle. His posture was tense, his shoulders tight. Jackson, he turned, and the relief that crossed his face nearly broke her. Elena. I was starting to think. He stopped. Are you all right? No. She walked closer. I'm not all right. I'm terrified and ashamed, and I've spent the last 2 days planning how to leave without saying goodbye because I thought it would hurt less. Jackson's face went pale. Elena, let me finish. Please. She took a shaking breath. I married a man who lied about everything. Who had an entire other life I knew nothing about. And I've spent 2 years trying to convince myself that I'm smarter now, that I can trust my own judgment. But this letter, her voice cracked. It proves I never knew him at all. And if I couldn't see the truth about David, how can I trust what I think I see in you? Because I'm not hiding anything, Jackson said quietly. You know everything about me, Elena. The good and the ugly. I told you about Abigail, about my failure to save her, because I wanted you to know the worst of me before you decided if I was worth staying for. And what if more keeps coming? What if David's past just keeps surfacing and dragging us both down? Jackson stepped closer. Then we deal with it. Together. That's what partnership means, facing the hard things side by side instead of alone. It's $300, Jackson. Money we need, it's $300 to buy your freedom from a past that wasn't your fault, Jackson interrupted. That's not too much. That's nothing compared to what you're worth, Elena shook her head. You don't understand. It's not just the money. It's everything that money represents. Another debt. Another lie. Another piece of evidence that I'm not the person you think I am. You're exactly the person I think you are, Jackson said firmly. Strong. Honest. Brave enough to start over with nothing. Brave enough to trust me even though you'd been burned. If David was a liar and a coward, that reflects on him, not you, but, no. Jackson's hands came up to frame her face, gentle but unyielding. I love you, Elena. Not despite your complicated past, but including it. Including every hard choice you've had to make, every scar you carry, every fear you're fighting. All of it makes you who you are. And who you are is someone worth fighting for. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. You love me, I love you, Jackson confirmed. Have for weeks now. I was waiting for the right moment to say it, but I guess this is as right as any. His thumbs brushed away her tears. And I'm not going to let some ghost from your past steal our future. What are you going to do? Jackson's expression hardened. I'm going to Dodge City. And I'm going to have a conversation with Marcus Hale. Jackson left at dawn the next morning, despite Elena's protests. Let me come with you, she'd said. No. You stay here and run things. I'll be back in 3 days. He'd kissed her forehead. Trust me, Elena. Just trust me, and she had. Because what else could she do? The days Jackson was gone felt endless. Elena threw herself into work, managing the ranch with the same efficiency she'd brought from the start. But her mind was in Dodge City, imagining a dozen different disasters. Ben tried to reassure her. Boss knows what he's doing, ma'am, but what if Marcus Hale has more evidence? More secrets, then boss'll handle it, Ben said simply. That's what good men do. On the third night, Elena lay in her cabin unable to sleep. Her packed bag sat in the corner. She'd prepared it compulsively, unable to quite let go of the option to run. A knock at the door made her heart leap. Jackson stood on her doorstep, dusty and tired but whole. In his hand was a document. It's over, he said simply. Elena pulled him inside. What happened? Jackson handed her the document. It was a signed statement from Marcus Hale, witnessed by a Dodge City sheriff, declaring that David Hartwell's widow owed no debts to anyone. And that any previous claims were fraudulent. I don't understand. Jackson sat heavily in her chair. Marcus Hale wasn't a creditor. He was a con man. He'd somehow gotten information about David's Omaha family and was using it to extort you. The woman in the photograph, Rebecca, she died years ago. The child isn't David's son. It's her nephew, and the photo was taken at a county fair. Elena's knees went weak. So none of it was real. The debt was real, but it had already been settled by Rebecca's family after David died. Marcus found out somehow and saw an opportunity. Jackson's jaw tightened. He'd been running similar schemes on other widows. The sheriff had been looking for evidence. I provided it. You didn't pay him. Hell no, I didn't pay him. I had him arrested. Jackson's gray eyes met hers. You're free, Elena. Completely free. No more debts. No more ghosts. Elena felt tears stream down her face. You did that for me. I did it for us, Jackson corrected. Because you were right about one thing, this isn't just your past anymore. It's ours. And I protect what's mine. Elena crossed to him and pulled him up, wrapping her arms around him. Jackson held her tight, his face buried in her hair. Thank you, she whispered. You don't have to thank me for proving I meant what I said. Elena pulled back just enough to see his face. I was going to run. You know. Had my bag packed and everything, I know. Jackson's hand cupped her cheek. Ben told me. And I understood why. But I'm glad you stayed long enough to give me a chance. I'm glad too. Elena rose on her toes and kissed him, deep and grateful and full of feeling she'd spent too long denying. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Jackson said, I have a question to ask you, Jackson. It's too soon, I know. We said we'd take time. But Elena, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. He knelt, there in her small cabin, and took both her hands. Elena Hartwell, will you marry me? Elena's heart felt too full for her chest. Yes. God, yes. Jackson surged to his feet and kissed her again, lifting her clean off the ground. When he set her down, both of them were laughing and crying at once. When? Jackson asked. Soon, Elena said. Before winter. Before either of us has time to overthink it. 6 weeks, perfect. They were married in early November on a clear, cold morning with the crew in attendance and Ben standing as witness. The ceremony took place in the ranch house parlor, officiated by a circuit preacher. Elena wore a new dress she'd sewn herself from blue wool Jackson had insisted on buying. She carried wildflowers Will had somehow found despite the frost. Jackson wore his best suit and looked at Elena throughout the ceremony like she was something precious and miraculous. When the preacher pronounced them married and Jackson kissed her, the ranch hands cheered loud enough to startle the horses. Mrs. Reid, Jackson said against her lips, testing the name. I'm keeping Hartwell for business, Elena said. Less confusing for contracts, whatever you want. As long as you're mine, ours, Elena corrected. We belong to each other now, equal partnership, Jackson agreed, and sealed it with another kiss. The wedding breakfast was laid out in the kitchen, ham, eggs, biscuits, fresh butter, preserves, and strong coffee. The men ate with enthusiasm while offering toasts ranging from heartfelt to ribald. To Mrs. Reid, Ben said, raising his coffee cup. The woman who arrived looking for kitchen work and ended up running the whole operation. To the boss, Will added, grinning. Smartest thing you ever did was hire her. To partnership, Jackson said, his eyes on Elena. May ours last a lifetime and beyond. To partnership, Elena echoed, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, Elena moved her belongings from the cabin to the main house, to the room that had been Jackson's alone and was now theirs together. Are you nervous? Jackson asked as they stood in their bedroom. A little. Are you? Terrified, Jackson admitted. Not of you. Of disappointing you. Elena crossed to him and took his hands. You already are everything I need. Partner, friend, equal. Everything else is just proof that we belong together. What followed was tender and gentle, two people learning each other with patience and care. Jackson was attentive, checking constantly that Elena was comfortable. And Elena let go of the last vestiges of fear and gave herself completely to this man who'd proven himself worthy. Afterward, they lay tangled together in darkness, and Elena felt peace settle over her. I love you, she whispered. I love you too. Thank you for taking the chance on us. Best risk I ever took, Elena said, and meant it. Spring came early, melting snow and greening the prairie with startling speed. Elena and Jackson fell into the rhythm of married life with easy partnership. The chicken operation Elena had planned launched in April with 50 laying hens. The egg and butter sales covered the entire household food budget within weeks, plus extra that went into an expansion fund. Look at this, Elena said one evening, showing Jackson her ledgers. We made $20 extra this month from eggs and butter alone. That's $20 of cattle money we can reinvest. You're a genius. I'm practical, Elena corrected. There's more than one way to make a ranch profitable. Catherine Brennan's standing order continued as promised, and by summer they were making monthly deliveries instead of quarterly. The ranch's reputation grew. Other buyers began approaching Jackson about regular purchases. We should consider expanding, Elena said one July evening. We've got the capital now, and the demand is there. If we purchase the grazing land to our west, we could increase our herd by 50% within 2 years. That's ambitious, ambition built this ranch back from the edge, Elena pointed out. No reason to stop now. They made the land purchase in August. Elena reviewed every contract clause personally, impressing the seller with her command of terms and numbers. The expanded operation meant hiring additional hands. Elena interviewed each candidate, assessing not just ranching skills but character. I need men who can take direction from a woman without complaint, she told Jackson. Because I'll be managing schedules and payroll. If they can't respect that, I don't want them here. They found 4 good men who understood the ranch's culture. Within a month, the new hands were integrated seamlessly. One of them was a young man named Will Carter, the same Will who'd been there since Elena's first day. She'd spent evenings teaching him to read using the ranch's ledgers, and now he was foreman, managing the daily crew assignments. You gave me a chance when nobody else would, ma'am, he'd said when Jackson promoted him. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Elena had replied. As autumn painted the prairie in shades of gold, Elena realized she was living a life she couldn't have imagined a year before. She was partner in a thriving ranch, wife to a man who valued her mind as much as her heart, and a woman whose competence was respected by everyone around her. One October evening, as she and Jackson sat on the porch watching the sunset, Elena said, "Do you remember the day I arrived?" "Every detail. You looked exhausted and terrified and determined all at once. I almost didn't hire you. What changed your mind?" "Your eyes," Jackson said. "They were afraid, but they weren't defeated. I saw strength there. I thought anyone with that much spine deserved a chance." "Best decision you ever made," Elena said lightly. "Second best." "The best was convincing you to marry me." Elena laughed and leaned against his shoulder, content in a way she had never been before, but that contentment was about to be tested in a way neither of them expected. In January, Elena missed her monthly courses. Then she missed another. By February, there was no denying it, "I'm pregnant," she told Jackson one quiet evening. Jackson's head snapped up, his eyes going wide. Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be. I think the baby will come sometime in late summer." Jackson set down his papers and crossed to her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "How do you feel about it?" Elena appreciated that he asked instead of assuming. "Terrified, honestly. After what happened to Abigail. But also happy. Hopeful. Ready to build a family with you. We'll get you the best medical care," Jackson said immediately. "I'll send for a doctor from Dodge City, Jackson." Elena put her hand over his mouth, stopping the worried planning. "I'm not Abigail. Every pregnancy is different. I'm healthy and strong, and I'll take every precaution. But I won't live in fear of what might happen. I can't lose you, you won't. I'm too stubborn to leave you alone with all these ledgers to manage." Jackson pulled her close, and Elena felt him trembling slightly. "I'm scared," he admitted. "I know. So am I. But we face this like we face everything else, together." The pregnancy progressed normally. Elena continued working, though Jackson and Ben both tried to get her to rest more. "I'm pregnant, not injured," she told them repeatedly. But as summer approached and her belly grew round, even Elena had to admit she needed help. Catherine Brennan came for a visit in July, bringing business proposals and also practical advice. "You're going to want to set up a proper business structure," Catherine said over tea. "Something that protects your assets and ensures your ownership stake is recognized legally, not just in practice." "What do you mean?" "I mean that right now, everything's in Jackson's name. If something happened to him, the ranch would go through probate. You could lose everything you've built." Catherine's sharp eyes were kind but firm. "I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help you protect yourself. Because women like us, we have to be smarter and more careful than men ever do." Elena discussed it with Jackson that night. He agreed immediately. "You should have been on the deed from the beginning," he said. "Let's fix that now." They rode to Dodge City the next week and had the ranch deed amended to include Elena's name. While they were there, Catherine proposed something else. I want to invest in your egg and butter operation, she said. Help you scale up production. In exchange, I get distribution rights for Kansas and Colorado. You get capital and access to my restaurant network. Elena reviewed the terms carefully. Then she and Jackson accepted. You're building an empire, Mrs. Reid, Catherine said with approval. We're building an empire, Elena corrected. Jackson and I together. In late August, Elena went into labor. It was long and difficult, 14 hours of pain that left her exhausted and wrung out. Jackson paced outside the room, his face pale with fear. Ben sat with him, steady and calm. She's strong, boss. She'll get through this. But what if? No what ifs, Ben interrupted firmly. You trust her. That's what you do. When the baby finally came, a healthy, squalling girl with Jackson's gray eyes and Elena's dark hair, the midwife brought her out personally. Mother and child are both fine, she announced. Mrs. Reid wants to see you. Jackson burst into the room. Elena lay in bed, exhausted but smiling, with their daughter cradled against her chest. Jackson, meet your daughter. Jackson approached slowly, wonder written across his face. He sank onto the edge of the bed and looked down at the tiny face peering from the blanket. She's perfect, he whispered. She looks angry, Elena said fondly. But I think we'll keep her anyway. What should we name her? Elena had been thinking about this. Sarah Abigail. For your first wife and the daughter you lost. To honor them and show they're not forgotten. Jackson's eyes filled with tears. Elena, they were part of making you who you are, Elena said gently. Which means they're part of making us who we are. It feels right to remember them. Sarah Abigail Reid, Jackson said, testing the name. Then he looked at Elena. His face full of emotion he couldn't quite articulate. Thank you. For surviving. For giving me this. For choosing you. Elena finished. You're welcome. Now hold your daughter while I rest. She's going to need a lot of attention, and I'm exhausted. Jackson took the baby carefully, cradling her like she was made of glass. Elena watched him, this strong man made gentle by new fatherhood, and felt her heart expand with love. They'd survived. All of them. 5 years later, 1884, Sarah Abigail was 5 years old, a whirlwind of energy and questions who followed Elena around the ranch asking about everything. Mama, why do you write in those books every day? Because numbers are power. Sweetheart, Elena explained, showing her daughter the ledgers. When you know exactly what you have and what you need, nobody can cheat you or take advantage. Can I learn numbers? Of course. We'll start tomorrow. Jackson taught Sarah to ride, to care for animals, to respect the land. And Elena taught her to read, to calculate, to question everything. Ben Cordell had married Sarah Mitchell 2 years earlier, and they lived in a cabin near the main ranch. Ben was slower now, his hair completely white, but his eyes still sharp and kind. Will Carter had married a woman from town and was talking about starting his own small ranch nearby. Because Mrs. Reid taught me that you can build something from nothing if you're willing to work hard enough. He said. The ranch had expanded significantly. They now ran 300 head of cattle, had a thriving egg and butter operation that employed 5 women from town, and had just broken ground on a new barn. Catherine Brennan visited regularly, and she and Elena had formed a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared business interests. You've built something remarkable here, Catherine said during one visit, watching Sarah Abigail help Elena check inventory. We built it, Elena corrected. Jackson and I together, that's rare, you know. True partnership. Most men want wives who serve. Most women want husbands who provide. But you two figured out something better, equality. 10 years later, 1889, Sarah Abigail was 10, and she asked Elena a question that showed how much the world was changing. Mama, why can't girls own ranches like Papa? They can, Elena said. And you will, if you want to. This ranch will be yours and your siblings someday, because there were siblings now. James, age 7, who loved working with the cattle, and Margaret, age 4, named after Catherine Brennan and already showing signs of her namesake's sharp business mind. The ranch had become one of the most successful operations in Kansas. Elena's business model, diversified income streams, careful financial management, fair wages for all workers regardless of gender, had been copied by other ranches throughout the territory. She'd been asked to speak at a conference in Denver about women in agricultural management. Jackson had encouraged her to go. "Your voice matters," he'd said. "Other women need to hear what's possible." Elena had gone, and she'd been terrified and exhilarated. The audience, mostly men, had been skeptical at first. But her numbers spoke for themselves. When she returned, Jackson had kissed her and said, "I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us," Elena had replied. 15 years later, 1894, Sarah Abigail was 15, brilliant and passionate, already talking about studying law. "I want to fight for women's rights, Mama. So other women can have what you have, respect, ownership." Partnership, Elena hugged her daughter, her heart full. "Then do it. And know that your father and I will support you every step." Jackson was in his early 50s now, his dark hair gone mostly silver, but his strength remained. He still rode out every day, still managed the land with the same careful attention, and Elena, at 44, still managed the business side with sharp efficiency. She'd recently been elected to the local school board, the first woman to hold the position, and was using it to advocate for better education for girls. One October evening, she and Jackson sat on the porch as they had so many times before. Their children were inside, doing homework. The ranch stretched out before them. "Prosperous and peaceful, do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked. "Staying here instead of pursuing something else, somewhere else?" Elena considered the question seriously. "Not for a single moment. This life we've built, it's everything I never knew I wanted, even when you're wrestling with ledgers at midnight, even then. Because I'm wrestling with them in a house I helped build, on land I helped purchase, for a business I helped grow from near failure to genuine success." She took his hand. "My name might be smaller on some contracts, but my contribution isn't smaller. And you've never treated it as such. Your contribution is equal to mine. Always has been." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set in shades of orange and purple. "We did well," Elena said softly. "We did," Jackson agreed. "We really did." 20 years later, 1899, Sarah Abigail Reid graduated from law school at age 20, the only woman in her class. She returned to Kansas determined to change laws that discriminated against women. James ran the daily cattle operations, having learned from both his parents the importance of fair management and environmental stewardship. Margaret, at 14, was already helping Elena with the business side, showing the same sharp mind for numbers and contracts. The ranch had grown to employ over 50 people year-round, with fair wages and safe working conditions that were remarkable for the time. Elena had insisted on it, and Jackson had supported her. "If we're going to build something that lasts," Elena had said years ago, "we need to treat people with dignity. That's not charity. That's good business." She'd been right. Their workers stayed for years, decades even. Families grew up on Reid Ranch, and the community that formed was tight-knit and loyal. Catherine Brennan, now in her 70s, visited one last time before retiring. She and Elena sat on the porch, two successful businesswomen who'd fought for respect in a man's world and won. "You changed things, you know," Catherine said. "Made it easier for women who came after. Proved we could be just as competent, just as profitable." "We changed things," Elena corrected. "You did it in your industry. I did it in mine. Together, we made space for others, together," Catherine agreed. She raised her coffee cup. To partnership," Elena echoed. The final years, Jackson died peacefully in his sleep at 73. Elena was 72, and the pain of losing him was terrible, but it was the pain of losing someone who'd made life richer, not someone who diminished it. They'd had 35 years of genuine partnership. 3 children. A legacy of respect and accomplishment, Elena continued managing the ranch business for another decade, working alongside their children with the same sharp mind and careful attention. At 82, when her hands finally shook too much to write clearly, she turned daily operations over to Sarah Abigail, but remained a consultant. The story of Elena and Jackson Reid became legend in Kansas ranching circles. The widow who'd arrived seeking kitchen work and stayed to build an empire. The widower who'd been wise enough to recognize her worth. The partnership that had changed how people thought about women's roles in agriculture. When Elena died peacefully at 86, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, the local newspaper ran a long obituary. But the final paragraph captured what mattered most. Elena Hartwell Reid arrived in Kansas with nothing but determination and skill. She left behind a legacy of accomplishment, a thriving ranch that employs 50 people, and proof that women's contributions to business and agriculture deserve recognition equal to any man's. But perhaps her greatest legacy is the example she set, that partnership, respect, and genuine equality in marriage aren't just possible, but can build something that lasts for generations. The Reid Ranch continued to thrive for decades more, passed down through Elena and Jackson's descendants. Each generation building on the foundation their great-grandparents had established. The original ranch house remained, preserved as a family museum. Elena's carefully maintained ledger sat on display alongside Jackson's breeding records, physical proof of 2 minds working together toward shared success. And on the porch where Elena had first stood, desperate and determined, there hung a small plaque that Sarah Abigail had commissioned shortly after her mother's death. It read simply, "Here, a woman came seeking work and found partnership. Here, a man offered employment and gained an equal. Here, 2 people built a legacy of love, respect, and shared purpose that changed everything." The story became the kind that mothers told daughters and fathers told sons, proof that genuine partnership was possible, that respect between equals could build something lasting, and that love built on honesty and mutual support could weather any storm. Elena Hartwell had come to Reid Ranch seeking work as a cook, carrying nothing but exhaustion, skill, and quiet resolve. She'd stayed to transform a failing operation into a thriving enterprise, to forge a marriage based on true equality, and to prove that a woman's strength, intelligence, and determination were worth exactly as much as any man's. She'd built a life not through rescue or dependence, but through partnership, courage, and the unwavering belief that she deserved respect and equality. And in doing so, she'd created something that lasted far beyond her own years, a legacy of possibility, of strength, and of love that showed itself through action rather than empty words. That was Elena Hartwell Reid's story. A widow who came to cook, stayed to lead, and built a life defined not by rescue, but by partnership, respect, and enduring love that proved, in the end, to be the strongest foundation of all. Thank you for staying with Elena and Jackson until the very end. Their journey reminds us that true partnership isn't about rescue, it's about 2 equals choosing to build something together, even when the past tries to tear them apart. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories about courage, resilience, and love that proves itself through action, not just words. Drop a comment below and tell me, what moment in Elena and Jackson's story resonated with you most? I read every single one. Until next time, remember, you're stronger than your past, and you deserve a partnership built on respect.